Good afternoon. My name is Orit Gadiesh. I'm the chairman of Bain and Company, and on behalf of the Chief Executives Club, I am delighted to welcome you all here again. There's perhaps no more closely scrutinized industry than the healthcare sector. Really, the products are developed, manufactured, and serviced with the intent of saving and improving people's lives. Today's speaker, Harry Kraemer, leads Baxter International, the global leader in surgical and medical instruments, with more than $8 billion in revenues and 48 employees or team members, as they're called within Baxter. Harry joined Baxter about 22 years ago as the Director of Corporate Development. And since becoming CEO in 1999, Harry's tenure has been marked by extraordinary financial performance, with annual growth in sales of 9% and 39% net income in Baxter's core businesses. But what makes all of this all the more remarkable is Harry's commitment to a healthy corporate culture, including the institution of balance between working and private life. Now, lots of people talk about it. I know I do and do nothing about it. But in this case, it's real. Corporate regulations such as 12-week paid maternity leave have resulted in an environment where women take up 47% of the manager ranks. One-third of Baxter's employees have unconventional flexible hours of some sort, and Harry himself is rarely in his office past 6 p.m. In fact, I don't think anybody ever saw him there. His time between 6:30 and 10 is always reserved for the family when he's at his hometown. And he really does set the rare example of a CEO who understands and lives a balanced life. But with your permission, I'd like to concentrate on an aspect of Harry's leadership style that I believe is truly unique, especially because this extraordinary quality provides a blueprint for leaders in these times of corporate upheaval. Harry's first major visible impact at Baxter came in 1993, when he became CFO in the midst of very troubled times for the company. Harry then led an effort that resulted in what Baxter called its new shared values: respect, responsiveness, and results, which Harry summarized in a phrase that every Baxter employee is quite familiar with: do the right thing. Do the right thing because guidelines, rules, and policies do not in and of themselves make people responsible and accountable. I think that Harry actually has since taken those shared values to a level rarely seen in corporations. A number of my colleagues at Bain, including one of my colleagues here today, have had the privilege of working with Harry and his organization, and they will tell you that do the right thing is really integral part of Baxter's culture, and I think Harry will tell you a lot more about that. But not only Harry says it and acts on it, but so does everyone else. Baxter employees know what it means, and they actually apply to the philosophy in their daily activities. But I'm going to assert that shared values of the company, its corporate DNA, never reveal themselves more than in a crisis. And Harry Kraemer's and Baxter's moment of truth came late 2001. The issue with selling drugs, devices, and solutions is that much can go wrong. Nearly every product that Baxter delivers is a matter of life and death. So when a small number of patients died after routine dialysis in Spain using filter manufactured by a subsidiary that was newly purchased in 2000, Baxter, as you can expect, took the situation very seriously. After an internal task force was able to finally isolate the manufacturing process that had resulted in the malfunctioning filters, action was both swift and decisive. Baxter didn't just fix the problem, and Baxter didn't hide either. In November 2001, although the public's attention was focused almost completely on the repercussions of September 11th, the company made public the circumstances and the facts, publicly accepted responsibility, and settled with the victim's family. Baxter shut down the new subsidiary for good along with its factories. FDA officials, suppliers, and competitors were immediately briefed in depth on the company's findings. Harry was personally and visible involved in both public and private communications and publicly took responsibility. The following month, Baxter took responsiveness to heart and combed through all its manufacturing processes looking for places where similar issues could occur. The company took an earning charge of about, I think, $180 million, and Harry recommended to the board that his performance bonus be cut. In the aftermath, the company's stock dropped but quickly recovered. Respect, responsiveness, results. Doing the right thing. These values are authentic at Baxter, and so are Harry's decisions and actions. I personally believe that nurturing a culture of shared values that allows organizations to deal with internal divisions and external threats is one of the most critical components of leaderships. It takes guts because it can inflict short-term pain, as it did in Baxter's case. However, strong core values, properly practiced, are a source of distinctiveness that can set you apart from competitors. So today I'm very happy to introduce a man who in his management decisions exemplifies actions built upon shared values, values that he himself introduced to Baxter 10 years ago and has practiced ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Kraemer.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm thinking I should probably pack up and leave right now. That was very kind, and I must say this is really a great honor to have the opportunity to chat with all of you this afternoon. I very, very much appreciate that, and I appreciate Peter's kind invitation. He's a very shy fellow. When I walked in and said, "Boy, this is a really nice venue," and he said, "Yep, it's the best venue in the United States." So I very much appreciate Peter's hospitality and to be with all of you. So, and I'll try to leave a little time for some discussion as well. If you think of what's going on around the world today, obviously all of us are dealing with a lot of things. The overall continuing economic doldrums that many of us are dealing with, the fact that we're dealing with what is constantly becoming a more and more global competitive environment, and clearly some of the comments Orit mentioned around the crisis in values that we're dealing with that really is cutting across every aspect of our lives, whether it's business, education, sports, religious institutions. It seems as if the media is focusing on everyone and everybody. But I do believe of all of the issues and challenges that as leaders we deal with, the most important, bar none, is the overall issue of the crisis of values. And again, given the fact that this is a group of leaders, I think it's important for all of us to constantly remember, if somebody is going to do something about it, it's probably going to be us. And I want to always make sure that we're challenging one another as what can we proactively do, because I think at the end of the day, nothing is more important than the values. And it impacts us in all areas of our lives. Clearly, from a business perspective, whether or not we are going to even be in business has an awful lot to do with how we're perceived by our team members within our firms, our customers, our investors, our communities, our neighbors, and it really will determine whether or not we are successful or not. So obviously, one of the key questions becomes, how can we all develop value-based organizations? And I'll be the very first to admit I have very few answers. I have a lot of opinions. And one of the things that I'm very proud of the fact is that among the 55,000 team members that I'm very privileged to work with at Baxter, we really are focused, as Ray had mentioned, on making sure that every single individual, whether you are in Chicago, whether you're in Boston, whether you are a salesperson in Manila, or whether you are on the manufacturing line in Guangzhou, you really understand what those shared values are. Now, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of years of how to deal with this crisis and the fact that there's a lot of complexity involved and there's a tremendous amount of jargon that is used. I have this habit of trying to keep things very, very simple. I think I do it because I don't want to get myself confused. I also think I do it because I'm very fortunate to have 5 small children, and I find that if I make things very complex, I confuse an awful lot of people at home. In fact, I always describe, while I truly enjoy my position at Baxter, it's really the easiest part of my life because at work, there's actually a few people that listen to me. At home, given the complication of things between a 15-year-old, a 12, 8, 4, and a 1-year-old, it is a totally different experience. But I find that what I learn in dealing with and really trying to train and develop 5 young minds has an enormous impact on what we do at Baxter with 55,000 folks. And at the end of the day, an awful lot of this really does come down to transparency, to openness, credibility, visibility, communication. I'm almost tempted to add common sense because I like to think of things as common sense, but I have this habit whenever I mention common sense, one of my very favorite quotes of Mark Twain, everything is common sense. However, common sense is not common. So I'll not try to get into that. In terms of where a lot of these principles come from, I find it very interesting that no matter where you are in the world, children seem to have these down very well. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of confusion, and when there are temptations related to what's right, what's wrong, very quickly it seems as if that becomes understood, whether in the home or whether your religious institutions, your training from your teachers. And if we're honest about it, most of us can probably remember a situation, I can think of 10 or 12 of them, where you did something and you really wondered whether or not you should tell dad or mom. Okay, I mean, you get that little feeling of, you remember that. You remember how difficult that was. And at the end of the day, the view that, you know what, I think I really should, because I really do believe I better do the right thing. I was teasing some of my team members in a couple talks a couple weeks ago as I go around the company every week that I actually came home a couple weeks ago, and my wife was running out, and she just said, you know what, I'm leaving, I'm heading out, sort of take care of everything, I'll be home at 9 or 10 o'clock. And there we were. I immediately had my 8-year-old, who's a daughter who's 8, going on 18, said, Dad, you really ought to go into the family room. You've got a major problem. Okay. So I went into the family room, and I noticed that the entire wall had red magic marker all over it. So my 4-year-old daughter was standing there, and I said, Diane, what happened here? I mean, Dad wants to know. Now, the advantage of being a little older is that you look at her hands, there's red magic marker all over her hands. And she looked at the wall, and she looked at me, and she said, Dad, I really don't know. I really don't know. And I said, Dad's had a relatively long day. Some of the questions, and I've asked people at work today, were, Harry, I just don't know. But I was assuming, what actually happened. She thought about it. She looked over at her little brother, Daniel, and said, Daniel did it. Now, Daniel's 11 months old. Daniel can't walk. And if you look at where the mark was, it'd be pretty tough, even if he could climb on a chair. So, I'm not sure why, but, Paul and I talk a little bit about Scranton, Pennsylvania sometimes. I said, you know what, Diane, if you didn't do it, that's okay. I'm taking Daniel to bed. He's going to bed now. And I picked him up, and he started crying. I was like halfway up the steps, and Diane said, Dad, I did it. I did it. Daniel shouldn't have to go to bed. And, I thought about that. And then I watched the news and listened to all these zany things that are going on where I think people are just very simply losing track of purpose. They're losing track of being centered. And I really do believe if we could figure out a way to get back to just the simplicity of it, I think we'd be a lot better off. Clearly, we all know that once you break trust, you can spend a tremendous amount of time, but it is very, very, very difficult to get it back. And given some of the things that have gone on over the last couple of years, this is not going to be easy to do. However, being an optimist, I'm convinced that if people are honest, if they're open, if they improve their transparency, we will get this back to where we'd like it to be. Because the converse of a lack of ethics or a lack of values, the converse of that is something that has an enormous impact. That is, if an organization and a leader are truly transparent, really believe they are going to do the right thing. Sometimes that's difficult to figure out what the right thing is. But if you're going to do the right thing, you are going to be open. You are going to have an open dialogue with all constituents, with all stakeholders. I really believe we can build extremely strong, viable organizations. Because if you think about it, once again, it's pretty simple. Most employees, most team members want to work for an institution that they are proud to be part of. Most customers and patients I'm aware of want to buy products and services from people that they respect and actually like. Most investors want to be able to deal with institutions that they respect and can generate a return. And most people that want to serve on a board of directors or a board of trustees truly want to serve that they can make a difference and are assuming that the leader isn't trying to be right, they're trying to do the right thing and actively expect to be challenged. And I think those are all things that I think are important. In terms of Baxter, we are on our journey, and despite the fact that I think we've received some favorable publicity, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. As an old math major, I always think of everything in terms of two scales, one relative and one absolute. If I look at where we stand relative to where we were, I think we've made quite a bit of progress. If I look at it on an absolute scale of the opportunity for us to get much better on all of these dimensions, I think it's enormous, and I think it'll have an enormous impact on our customers, on our team members, on our shareholders, on society at large. From time to time, we've done a bad job of servicing our customers. Sometimes in a large institution, people can forget that the whole reason we got this team together was to serve customers. And sometimes it is very easy to get more internally focused than externally focused, and we all know what the impact of that is. We obviously, from time to time, have disappointed our shareholders. And sometimes in a large enterprise, it's sometimes too easy to forget that these are the individuals that actually own the company. These people are not somebody that is a disturbance or something that sort of gets in the way. They own the company. And making sure that we do the best job we can describing what we think we're capable of doing in an open, honest, transparent way becomes very, very critical. And making sure that we do a better job of setting expectations, I think, becomes really critical. Not that that's easy. Another one of my favorite quotes from Yogi Berra, which I know in this town is probably not a good one to use. Predictions are very risky, particularly about the future. We talk about some of the situations that we've been involved in, such as the Dialyzer Crisis, and interestingly enough, as difficult as an experience that was, it actually was very simple. Because when it happened, there was no question that we were going to do the right thing. We weren't going to get involved in what are the legal implications, what are the financial implications, who else could be blamed for what. This was something that we were going to take accountability for, we take responsibility for, and we would try to do the right thing. In terms of areas that all of us can focus on as we try to figure out how we can do better, I listed several things that I think are helpful in thinking through the building of a value-based organization. And again, some people look at this in very different ways. I have the habit of trying to keep this very simple, but I listed 10 of them. Number one, leadership. I always like to define terms because everybody uses the term leadership. I think of this as a very, very simple but delicate combination of self-confidence and humility. Self-confidence to know that you, together with a team of people, can get certain things done, blended with a true understanding of humility. And that is that you really are no better than anybody else. And I'm not sure, and at some point in time, I'd like to go back to school and take more psychology. Something seems to happen to many of us the more successful we are in an institution. Because you actually get to a point where you actually believe it's because of you. or you actually believe that it isn't the people that got you there. Or we run into situations where we have colleagues that literally have trouble fitting through doorways. And I think to the extent that we realize that, you know what, we may be very lucky, we may be very fortunate, we may have certain skills, but it probably has something to do with somebody upstairs, and maybe there's an expectation that we're supposed to do something as a result of those gifts. Keeping that in perspective and keeping that balanced, I think, is a very, very important part of this. Because if you don't, you're going to be surrounded by people who actually believe you want to think that you know everything, as opposed to people saying, you know, Harry, that just doesn't make any sense. You're running the company, but that would really be a stupid thing for us to do. And if folks really know that your only goal is to do the right thing, I think our ability to be challenged and avoid making the mistakes, which we know we're going to make from time to time, minimal. The second part of it is clearly defining the values. I find there's a lot of folks that really believe in the importance of this, but it ends up being something that ends up being very convoluted, or it's posted on some sign someplace, but people really don't understand it. It's not reinforced, and it's not made simple enough that people can really understand what is being respectful, responsive, and results-oriented really all about. And is it really the foundation of everything we do? The third piece is all about listening and seeking to understand. I've always been a great fan of Stephen Covey, and all the comments that he always makes about seek to understand before you're understood. I actually had a teacher in school who always used to say, you know, Harry, it's really, really hard to listen when you're always talking. And I really think taking the time to really think, and everybody's running around, there's a million things to do, but whatever way you can, take the time to be a little reflective and be able to put a lot of this in perspective, I think is actually unbelievably important. And I have been very fortunate because I've been married now for 23 years, but when I was dating my wife at Lawrence College in Wisconsin, her father found out that this was starting to get a little serious, and he said, you know, if you're going to be getting serious with my daughter, I think it's important that I get to know you a little bit, and there's something that I want you to do with me. I want you to come on this retreat with me. And I wasn't sure what a retreat was, but I said, you know, I like this guy's daughter. I mean, how tough could this be? Sure, I'll be more than happy to do this. When I arrived for this 4-day adventure, he said, you know, I kind of held back one thing on you, which is going to be a little tough for you. Two things you need to know. Number one, this is run by the Jesuits. He said the second thing you need to know is it's a silent retreat, which basically means you won't say anything for the next 4 days. Now, for me, that was fairly remarkable. But I have now gone back with my father-in-law 23 consecutive years, the first week of December, and it's probably the best 4 days I spent, because I do nothing other than reflect. I do nothing other than try to put things in perspective. What's important, what's not? Am I really leading Baxter in the way consistent with what we say we're going to do? Are there things that we ought to be doing differently? Do we really have the right balance in our lives as leaders? And I find taking the time to reflect something that is unbelievably important if, in fact, we're going to get to where we need to be, in whatever way people think that's important. The fourth piece is communication, and this gets talked about a lot. I actually believe that communication is the hallmark of really being a successful value-based company. Because if you're an institution where people are changing, people really want to understand what the expectations are. They really want to know, is this something that really is true? And to be honest with you, 10 years ago when I would go through some of this over and over again, after a couple months I thought, you know, I think maybe I've done this enough. Maybe I can sort of lay back a little bit on this. And I had a lot of good friends in the company who said, Harry, you know what? That's exactly what some people are waiting for, because there's a certain amount of people that are sort of in the bunker expecting that this is really going to pass over. This is going to be like some kind of typhoon, and it's been a long hurricane, but this will let up, and I can go back to doing things the way we used to do them. And I realized that this really is over and over and over again. And given the technology we have available today across voicemail, email, conference calls, video conferencing, coffee chats, etc., I think it is absolutely critical that the leadership of the company is always present, always available, and people can understand what's going on. Which gets me to the fifth piece of the need to serve as a role model. And this one I find fascinating because if I think about what's gone on often in the last 5 or 6 years, there is sometimes this tendency to talk about, well, but they did that's sort of on their private time. I mean, if they're doing a good job in public service, we really shouldn't worry too much about what they're doing at other times. That's one that completely confuses me. Because I believe if you're going to be a role model is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People are watching what you do, which is my other very favorite quote from Andrew Carnegie. The older I get, the less I listen to what people say, and the more I watch what they do. And people realize, I believe, that we're all human. But if you say that you're going to operate in a certain way, if you say things are important, you better live them. Because it's so fascinating that when you think back to when you were in a cube, for some of us that was 20 years ago, for some of us it may have been 5 or 10 years ago, others 40. If you remember how you thought about things when you were in that cube, I think life becomes very simple. I personally think about that at least once a day. Exactly what was I thinking? Why don't those folks take the time to explain what they're trying to get done? We're actually employees of the company. We're part of the team. We'd like to help. Why don't they tell us what they're doing? Why can't it be more open? Why can't it be more transparent? And often folks would say, if you're not going to live a certain code of values, that's probably okay because there's a lot of companies that don't. But the only thing worse than not doing it is saying you're going to do it and not do it. Don't insult me. Because I think we sometimes forget how bright people really are. The next one is really measuring and reporting your progress in the areas that matter the most. And this one I find very interesting because if you're not measuring it, let's be honest, it's not going to happen. There's too many other things that are going on. And you have to ask yourself, if you're really going to be a values-driven company, if the team members you have expect you to be socially responsible, you better take that pretty seriously. And it better go beyond what's your sales number and what's your EPS number. So if you're really serious about being a best citizen, you better be as serious about our social responsibilities, our environmental responsibilities, as our economic viability. Some people refer to it as sustainability. There's a lot of work that's been done by the Global Reporting Initiative. But again, if these things are important, then somebody, most likely the leaders, are going to have to do something about it. The seventh one is sharing your experiences and constantly seeking best demonstrated practices. What do you feel you do well? What do you feel you may do better than other people that you can share with others? And are you open to what other people are doing that could be a lot better than anything that your institution is doing? Because again, if you get over early from a leadership perspective that you're not trying to be right, that you're trying to do the right thing, being open to new ideas and better ways makes you a better person and helps you run, I believe, a better company. The eighth piece is really holding folks accountable. And interestingly enough, you really have to constantly define, constantly communicate terms, because even when you're trying to do the right thing, some people can get very confused. So for example, one of the key hallmarks that we focus on is respect. And often that works well, but sometimes people can take that the wrong way. They can take respect to mean that, you know what, we've really got to make sure that I'm not challenging you because you could take that the wrong way. And maybe I'm being overly pushy or maybe I'm being critical. Well, if you're going to be successful, you better constantly be challenging one another, constantly be pushing one another. You can do it in a respectful way, but we better make sure that we hold one another accountable, and we better make sure that there's no exceptions. And if we say that this is important and how you treat people and how you conduct yourself is important, then we better be very careful that when Joe, who has got a 20-year record of having excess achievement on his P&L, and we say, well, you know, he didn't treat people respectfully, he did something which shouldn't have happened. Well, you know what? Joe's kind of a special case. I don't think Joe can be a special case because you've got 54,999 people that are going to wonder, what is going to happen to Joe? And are you serious about these things, or are you just paying lip service to them? Number 9, communicate again, because you've always got to make sure that you may have forgotten earlier on that you were going to communicate. And number 10, very simply to tie it all together again, no matter what, make sure that you're doing the right thing. And I think if you really think through what are the implications of doing the right thing, life becomes much, much simpler and actually does approach common sense. My father-in-law would be disappointed if I didn't at least mention one thing from one of the retreats. This one I actually see because it's in St. Paul, Minnesota. They actually have it written outside of a plaque, which when I think of this whole world we're living in of values and sometimes lack thereof, I will quote this one. What good does it a man, I think now we'd say, or a woman, to gain the whole world and suffer the loss of their soul? Thank you very much.
We have a couple more time, and Harry has graciously agreed to answer questions. If somebody is asking a question, there are mics around. So if you, anybody wants to start? There's a question over there.
Harry, what is Baxter doing to contain healthcare costs? Naturally, as one of the health centers of the world, this is a very strong issue in this market.
Sure. I'll give you a couple views. And by the way, I'm always sensitive to everyone. So people that have got to get to another meeting or whatever, please feel free to do that. It's not a problem, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. What we're trying to do and what we're focused on is what can we constantly do across all of our areas of business to figure out a way to constantly improve the quality and at the same time have the best total delivered cost. And that obviously is a challenge because if you think about where technology is today, technology is going to continue to make more and more products and services available, but there is this significant dilemma as to how we're going to pay for it. So we're trying to figure out ways how we can constantly improve the cost. But it is probably the most significant challenge in healthcare. Because if you think about the future, talk about a challenge, the only thing that's pretty clear to me is that given technology, the next generation is clearly going to live to 100 years old. But you think about the social implications of how that's going to get paid for, it's pretty phenomenal.
Harry, do you have a personal view on our ability to deal with bioterrorism attacks? I'm thinking in terms of Baxter's efforts in smallpox vaccines.
Well, given the fact that Baxter is one of the leaders in this particular area, we are very focused in working with the government on all the possible combinations of things somebody that has a complete total lack of values could and may do. And that's something that we're involved in a whole series of projects, most of which we don't talk about. But I think, again, the level of communications, and I think some of the things that the President's trying to do to understand the critical importance of this, because one of the things they're obviously most concerned about is that people actually believe, okay, that's behind us, and now things are going to sort of eventually return to normal. I think it's pretty clear we are never going to return to normal. So having people focused on these activities is pretty critical, and there's a number of institutions that are working very strongly in all of those areas. Yes, sir. Here, I think he's got the mic for you right here.
For an industry that has, over the last 10 or 15 years, spent a phenomenal amount in R&D, it seems like the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have that much coming out of it at this point to show for it. I'm just wondering what your view is in terms of getting new products out, which I think in the end is the ultimate answer for shareholder value in your industry. Is there a breakthrough coming, or is it still
Well,
more
if
of the
you
same?
take a look at the industry overall, yeah, I'm smiling only because, given the fact that a lot of my background is financial, I feel like I ask that question historically a lot. When I think of the amount of dollars that gets spent, it's a little bit of, where's the beef? Because I do believe that there has been an unbelievable amount of money that gets spent. And typically what I try to make sure that our teams do across Baxter is, before we talk about spending more, how do we make sure that the two things that I think management is most responsible for in terms of setting the priority and allocating the resources so that you're getting the biggest bang for the buck in terms of things that really will have something to do with providing critical therapies and saving lives. But I think it's fair to say that the overall productivity of R&D across all of healthcare, from my vantage point, could be much improved. And I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot more work done in that area, but I think there's a lot more to do. Yes, sir.
Going back to leadership for a moment, you mentioned transparency a couple of times. Transparency can be defined in many ways, and we can think about sort of motives of leaders to be transparent, or sharing information could be kind of a way of being transparent. Can you say a little bit more about, as a leader, what transparency means to you?
Sure. I guess the best way I would describe it, in my own personal view, is if you believe that certain things are important, how do you make sure that people realize that there is something transparent or something very visible in what you're doing that makes people realize that that really is the truth in terms of what you're trying to do? So the example that I would give that I think I talked a little bit about before, if you think about it, in today's workforce, most of us are trying to create balance. Most of us are focused on a career. Many of us have families. Many of us have social responsibilities, things we want to do health-wise, spiritual considerations, and we're trying to balance all of those things. Now, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in a lot of companies, if you talked about these things, either directly or indirectly, there'd be a little bit of, well, aren't you serious? I mean, aren't you committed? Well, I think today more people realize we're committed to living a balanced life. Now, we got to get the job done. We have a tremendous amount of customers and patients that are dependent on us. But how do you create the flexibility, and how do you let people know we're not looking for people that are going to work 24 hours a day and sacrifice their families, their spirituality, their health, and everything else? What are we going to do about that? And I think from a transparency, it's got to be more than just talk. So I see and find a lot of really well-intentioned people who say, well, that's real important. And, if you want to work flex hours or you want to leave early to pick up, that's not a problem. But interestingly enough, people watch what people do. So if you're not doing that yourself, and people don't realize that that is something that's important to you, I think the chance of that permeating an organization is very, very small. And I think everybody has their own habits. Everybody has their own times. Some people like to come into work early. Some people, leave. From my standpoint, I figure, I'm fortunate to have 5 small children at one part of my life. So for me, getting home at 6:30 when I'm in town is real important. And once they go to bed at 10, I can go for a jog for an hour. I can do phone mail or email till 1 or 2 in the morning, fine. But that's really important. So the fact that people understand what's important to one another, and since everybody may have different things they're trying to balance, but letting people know this is really serious. You really do have those opportunities, if you really believe it, because everybody's going to see through it anyway. So is it as transparent as if somebody was really following you around 24 hours a day? And if it changes when people aren't following you, then you have to ask yourself, is it really being transparent? That's why I describe it 24/7.
I'm sorry. Peter will kill me if we weren't transparently on time. I am sure, knowing Harry, I'm sure he'll be delighted to continue to answer questions, and I'm sure that people stopping him will get some more of his wisdom. But on behalf of the club, thank you very much. It was really amazing.